Well, welcome to the Holy Land and this biblical site of Sepphoris. Some very unique things happened here. We're just a stone's throw away from Nazareth, so it's extremely likely that Jesus worked right here with his Father. He was a carpenter, but he was also a stone worker. And this city was being built during the time of Jesus, so he probably came over here to work. Another interesting thing we're going to be talking about is about the time Jesus was born. Right in there was a Jewish rebellion that happened in this area, so there were many Jews that were crucified right in this area. And so it's very likely when Jesus was talking about crucifixion, unless you take up your cross and follow me, he could have been referring to this event that happened right here. So at this biblical site, we'll be looking at the location of this place and why that's so important. We'll talk about the historical background of this location. We'll be looking at some of the amazing places of interest at this site. We'll see the key events in the Bible that took place here. And we'll end with the faith lesson in order to learn the major lessons God desires for us from this important biblical site. So we're going to be looking at this site, and it's going to be a special talk. So I encourage you to really follow along. Now a little bit about the location of Sepphoris. It's located about 4 miles or 6 kilometers northwest of Nazareth and about 14 miles or 23 kilometers from the Mediterranean Sea and about 15 miles or 25 kilometers from the Sea of Galilee. Because of its close proximity to Nazareth, it was easily accessible by Jesus and his father Joseph. Now a little bit about the historical background. The city started to grow during the 2nd century BC under Greek rule. Later, under Roman rule, during the time of Christ, Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, invested in it significantly and made it the ornament of Galilee. It was a sophisticated Roman city with all of the luxuries of modern life at that time. It included a network of markets, colonnade, paved streets, residential houses, public buildings, bathhouses, a theater, and a synagogue. Sepphoris rose to recognized status during the century before Christ because it was located right on one of the main trade routes linking Africa with Asia and Europe, and it was called the Via Mare, so it was an international trade route, and so Sepphoris was right on that trade route. Therefore, it was a very, very wealthy city. It was also a military city guarded well by Roman troops. Sepphoris was the capital of the Galilee area during the time of Christ. In order to rebuild the city, Herod Antipas used a massive workforce. Because Nazareth was so close to Sepphoris, and because Jesus was a Tekton, which is a Greek word for construction worker of various types, Jesus and his father undoubtedly worked here. So in part, it's also where Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man, as found in Luke 2:52. Because it was mainly a Jewish city, it was giving its Hebrew name Tsipori, because it sits on a hilltop like a bird. So there was a bird called a Zippor, so they named it Zippori after this bird. Sepphoris is also known as the Mosaic City, as some of the best mosaics in all of Israel are found here. More than 40 mosaic floors reveal the bustling life of a Roman city and the luxury it afforded. After Herod's death in 4 BC, the Roman army put down a rebellion of Jewish rebels led by a man named Judas. These rebels numbered several thousand and were killed. However, according to Josephus, a Jewish historian, around 2,000 of these rebels were kept alive to be crucified right here in these streets and close by roads in the area. These mass crucifixions were carried out to instill fear in others who might consider rebelling against the Romans. So crucifixion was a way to show to everyone that if you're going to rebel, this is what's going to happen to you. Now, Sepphoris did not join in the Jewish rebellion in 66 to 70 AD when Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD and was therefore spared destruction. After the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, Sepphoris became a center of Jewish learning and seat of the Sanhedrin Supreme Court. The Mishnah, the first authoritative collection of Jewish oral law, was compiled here. Sepphoris witnessed Byzantine, Crusader, and Ottoman rule in the centuries following. Now let's look at some things in the Bible that took place here in this area. Now, while Sepphoris is not mentioned in the Bible, it is significant for several reasons. One, it was close by to Nazareth and employed many carpenters. Now, because Jesus was a carpenter or Tekton, he worked in many different areas. He was a stonemason. It was basically a construction worker. So it's very likely, as we mentioned, that Jesus worked right here and spent much time right here. Now, after the death of Jesus' earthly father, Joseph, Christ became the chief financial provider for his family. So we don't know exactly when Jesus' father Joseph dies, but it appears it's before Jesus started his earthly ministry, and Jesus started that at 30. So it's very likely that before Jesus started his ministry, because he was the oldest, he was the chief financial provider for the family. So he was a very, very hard worker. Christ worked hard here to provide for his family. So Christ was very responsible in caring for his family and expects us to do the same. So in 2 Thessalonians 3, 10 and 11, the Apostle Paul says, "For even when we were with you, we would give you this command, if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. For we hear that some of you walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busybodies." So Christ was not that. He was a hard worker who provided for his family. And in John 19:26 it says, "When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby," this is when Jesus was being crucified on the cross, and John was right there, Jesus said, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. So Jesus cared for his family. He cared for his mother. It appears also that Jesus used references about this city in his teachings. It says in Matthew 5:14 and 15, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all the house. So Sepphoris was certainly on a hill, and in fact, its name means hill or named after bird. In Matthew 6:2 it says, "Thus when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you." Now the word for actor in Greek is hypocrite, because these actors would walk the streets sounding their horns to advertise an upcoming event at the city theater. Jesus used them as an example of what not to do when giving to others and serving God. So the word hypocrite was used for the person who would put on a mask to make these advertisements, so they were kind of fake. So Jesus was saying, don't be fake, be genuine in your service and your giving to God. It says in Mark 8:34 through 38, "And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, 'If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? And what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels.'" So it's likely that Christ used this example to teach about the cost of being a disciple. Now it's also very likely that Christ's audience witnessed and knew all about this event that took place here. So when Christ referred to crucifixion and being willing to take up your cross, that embedded within them the stark reality, a very poignant painted picture of what following Christ meant. It meant being willing to give your life if that's what God asked you to do. So to the Jewish mind, Christ's teaching about the cost of being a disciple and taking up your cross would have sent a powerful and sober message of what Christ was asking of his followers. He was asking for 100% total commitment. Christ also used the imagery of crucifixion to teach us how we should daily crucify our personal desires that are contrary to God's desires. So not only should we be willing to give our lives to Christ, for Christ, if that's what he calls us to do, but we also should be on a daily basis willing to die to ourselves and live for Christ. As the Apostle Paul says, "I have been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." So it's a picture of that as well. So let's look at some faith lessons of what we can learn from this site. Now, Jesus was a hard worker, and so are we hard workers. Jesus provided for his family. He worked very hard as a child, as a son, as a teenager, but then when his father died, he worked very hard and became the chief breadwinner to provide not only for his mother, but his other siblings as well. So we should be hard workers as well. The Bible doesn't have any room for being lazy and slothful and irresponsible. It teaches just the opposite. So also in the same way that Jesus provided for his family, are we providing for those under our care, for our family, and those whom we're called to care for? Now, Jesus was undoubtedly good at what he did as a construction worker. So do we develop our skills, and do we become good at what our jobs are? Jesus became a very good, skilled builder. So in the same way, we should develop ourselves and become skilled at whatever God's called us to do, whether it be a secular job, ministry position, whatever we're called to do, we should grow in that and become good at that. So not only was Jesus spiritually responsible, but he was also physically responsible as well in caring for his family. Now, Jesus also likely used Sepphoris as an example of being a city on a hill, a light to others. So do we have good testimonies? Are we living for Christ? Are we lights in this world? Are we set apart and devoted to Christ so that others can see and be ministered to through us? Now, Jesus also likely used the actors here in Sepphoris who went about blowing their trumpets, who were hypocrites, had a mask on, as what not to do when we give to God and do things for others. God wants us to do that to the Lord, not for our own self-glory and self-magnification. So it's very, very special to be here. And as I think of the reality of Christ probably working here, all the examples and these Jews that were crucified here, and the cost of being a disciple, there's some strong messages for us today that we can learn from this site. So thank you for watching, and may God richly bless you. Have a good time?
Yeah.